Tonight, I will tell you a quiet story about a young man named Elias and the dangerous choice he made. It is a story about music, ambition, and the things we are willing to lose. But on this particular evening, under the gray sky of the city, Elias did not know that his life was about to break into pieces. He did not know that a simple wish can sometimes be a curse in disguise. The story begins in a city that felt timeless. It was a place of wet cobblestones, tall iron gates, and gas lamps that flickered against the fog. Here, it always seemed to be raining. It was not a heavy storm, but a cold, constant drizzle that soaked through coats and hats. The city was beautiful, but it was also hard. It was a place where people walked fast, looked down at the ground, and protected their own secrets. On the corner of 4th Street in Maine, Elias stood with his violin. Elias was 23 years old. He was thin, with pale skin and dark, messy hair that fell over his eyes. He wore a coat that was too big for him, patched at the elbows. To the thousands of people who rushed past him every day, Elias was nobody. He was just part of the background, like a lamppost or a mailbox. But if they had stopped, if they had truly listened, they would have heard magic. Elias was not just a street player. He was a master. When he closed his eyes and pulled the bow across the strings, the violin sang. It didn't just make sound. It cried, it laughed, it whispered. He played with a passion that should have filled a great concert hall, with velvet seats and chandeliers. But instead, his music was swallowed by the noise of traffic and the sound of rain hitting the pavement. A woman in a thick fur coat walked past him. Elias leaned forward, pouring his heart into a high, sweet note, hoping she would turn her head. She did not. She only pulled her collar up against the wind and hurried away. A group of businessmen marched by, checking their watches, talking loudly about money. They almost bumped into Elias, forcing him to step back into a puddle. They did not apologize. They did not even see him. Elias lowered his violin. His fingers were stiff from the cold. He looked at the open instrument case at his feet. Inside, there were only 3 copper coins. It was barely enough for a loaf of bread, let alone the rent for his tiny, freezing room. He felt a familiar heaviness in his chest. It was not just hunger. It was a deep, aching loneliness. He felt invisible. He felt that he was screaming at the world, but he had no voice. He packed his violin away slowly, his hands trembling with frustration. He thought this was just another cold, miserable night. He thought he would walk home, eat his dry bread, and sleep. But he was wrong. As he turned to leave the corner, the fog seemed to thicken around him, and the air suddenly smelled different, like old paper and strange spices. He did not know it yet, but the city had finally decided to notice him. Elias walked home through the dark, wet streets. He kept his head down, protecting his instrument case under his coat. He did not live in the beautiful part of the city. He lived in a narrow, crooked building near the river, where the fog was thick and the smell of the water was strong. His room was on the 4th floor. It was a tiny, box-like space. The wallpaper was peeling off in long, yellow strips, and the single window was cracked. There was a fireplace, but it was empty and cold. Elias did not have money for wood. He sat down at a small, wobbly table and emptied his pockets. Clink, clink, clink. 3 copper coins fell onto the wood. He stared at them. It was a pathetic sight. 3 coins, he whispered to the empty room, for 5 hours of playing. He felt a hot, sharp anger rise in his chest. He knew he was better than the musicians who played in the grand theaters. He had heard them. They were technically perfect, yes, but they had no soul. They played like machines. Elias played like a man on fire. But they wore silk suits and ate warm dinners while he sat in the cold, counting pennies. He looked at his violin. It lay on the bed, looking old and tired. The varnish was scratched, and the wood was dull. One of the tuning pegs was loose. "It's your fault," Elias said to the violin, his voice bitter. "You are too ugly. You sound thin. If I had a real instrument, a masterpiece, people would stop. They would have to stop." He picked up the violin in the bow. He needed to comfort himself. He closed his eyes and began to play a slow, sad melody. For a moment, the cold room disappeared. The peeling wallpaper vanished. There was only the music, warm and golden, filling the air. Elias felt a brief moment of peace. He felt like a king in his own castle. Bang, bang, bang. A heavy fist pounded on his door. The music stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavy and terrible. "Elias!" A rough voice shouted from the hallway. It was Mr. Russo, the landlord. "I know you are in there. I heard that screeching noise. Where's my rent? You are 2 weeks late." Elias sat perfectly still, holding his breath. His heart hammered against his ribs. He looked at the 3 copper coins on the table. They were an insult. "Tomorrow," Elias lied, his voice trembling slightly. "I will have it tomorrow, Mr. Russo. I promise." "Tomorrow," the landlord grunted. "Always tomorrow. If you don't pay by noon, you're out on the street. Do you hear me? Out!" Heavy footsteps walked away, fading down the stairs. Elias lowered the violin. The magic was gone. The peace was shattered. He looked around his miserable room, and the anger returned stronger than before. He was tired of being afraid. He was tired of being cold. He was tired of being nobody. He stood up and walked to the cracked window. He looked out at the city lights glowing in the distance. They looked like diamonds he could not touch. "No more," he whispered. "I am done with this. I don't care what I have to do. I will make them listen to me." He decided in that moment that he would pay any price to change his life. But he did not know that the city was listening to his promise. And outside, in the shadows of the alley below, a door that was not there yesterday had just appeared. Driven by anger and the need to escape his cold room, Elias ran down the stairs and out into the night. The rain was heavier now, drumming against the roofs like a nervous heartbeat. He walked without a destination, his feet moving automatically through the twisting alleys he knew so well. But then he stopped. In a narrow alleyway that he had walked down 1,000 times, there was something new. Between a bakery and a shoe repair shop, a narrow black door stood in the shadows. It had a handle made of polished brass, and a small, elegant sign hung above it. The sign read, "The Merchant of Lost Things." Elias felt a strange pull in his chest. He reached out and turned the brass handle. Dingling, a small bell rang as he stepped inside. The difference was instant. Outside, the world was wet, gray, and freezing. Inside, the shop was warm, dry, and filled with a soft, golden light. The air smelled of cedar wood, beeswax, and something sweet like burnt sugar. The shop was crowded with objects, silver mirrors, old clocks, and glass jars filled with colorful smoke. But Elias only saw one thing. On a table in the center of the room, resting on a cushion of dark blue velvet, lay a violin. It was a masterpiece. The wood glowed with a deep, rich color, like honey in the sunlight. It had no scratches, no dust. It looked alive. Elias walked toward it as if he were in a trance. He reached out his hand, his fingers trembling. "It is beautiful, isn't it?" The voice was smooth and quiet. Elias jumped and turned around. Standing in the shadows was a tall man in an immaculate black suit. He was thin, with pale skin and eyes that were a little too dark. He smiled, but the smile did not reach his eyes. "I am the merchant," the man said softly, "and you are Elias. You know my name?" Elias asked, his throat dry. "I know many things," the merchant replied. He walked over to the table and picked up the golden violin. "Try it." Elias took the instrument. It felt light, perfectly balanced, as if it were made for his hands alone. He lifted the bow and played a single note. The sound was pure perfection. It was rich, deep, and powerful. It filled the small shop and seemed to vibrate in Elias's bones. It was a sound he had always heard in his head, but could never create. "I want it," Elias whispered. He lowered the violin, his heart pounding. "But I have no money. I have nothing." The merchant laughed softly. It was a dry, scratching sound. "Money? I have no use for money, Elias. I deal in other currencies." He leaned closer, his dark eyes locking onto Elias's face. "I trade in human experience," the merchant said. "For this violin, the price is small. I do not want your soul. That is too dramatic. I only want a memory. One small memory for one great gift." Elias blinked. "A memory? Which one? Does it matter?" The merchant shrugged. "You have thousands of them. The smell of your mother's kitchen, the face of a childhood friend, a rainy afternoon when you were 7. Just one tiny piece of your past, gone forever. In exchange, you get the future you dream of. You get the world." Elias looked at the violin. He imagined himself on a great stage, the crowd cheering, the money pouring in. Then he thought about his cold room and the 3 copper coins. "What is one memory?" he thought. "I won't even miss it. I have so many. It is a small price for a dream." "I accept," Elias said clearly. "Excellent choice," the merchant whispered. He extended a cold, thin hand. Elias shook it. At the moment their skin touched, he felt a sudden, sharp coldness shoot through his head, like an ice headache. It lasted only a second, then vanished. "It is done," the merchant said, handing him the velvet case. "Go now. The world is waiting." Elias took the violin and turned to the door. He felt triumphant. He felt powerful. He thought he had made the best deal of his life. He hurried out into the rainy night, holding his prize tight against his chest. He was so excited that he did not look back. If he had, he might have seen the merchant's shadow smile, a smile that looked very hungry, and he might have realized that he could not remember why he had felt sad earlier that day. He thought he still had time to fix things if he wanted to. He was wrong. The next morning, Elias did not go to his usual dark corner. He walked straight to the Grand Square, the busiest part of the city. He felt different. He walked taller. The violin case in his hand felt light, but it hummed with a strange energy. He opened the velvet case, lifted the golden violin, and began to play. The moment the bow touched the strings, the air in the square changed. It was not like playing an instrument. It was like casting a spell. The music was impossibly beautiful. It was loud and clear, cutting through the noise of the carriages and the shouting vendors. People stopped instantly. A businessman dropped his newspaper. A woman dropped her shopping basket. Within 5 minutes, a crowd of hundreds formed a circle around him. They stood in total silence, mesmerized by the sound. When Elias finished the song, there was a second of shocked silence, and then roar. The applause was like thunder. It washed over him, warm and intoxicating. "Bravo! Magnificent!" they shouted. Coins did not just clink into his case. They rained down. Silver coins, even gold coins. In 1 hour, Elias made more money than he had made in 5 years. He felt dizzy with happiness. He felt seen. He felt loved. That evening, he sat in his small room, but it didn't feel cold anymore. He had bought wood for the fire and a hot meal of roast chicken and wine. He poured the coins onto the table. They glittered in the firelight. "I did it," he whispered, grinning. "I finally did it." He wanted to share this victory. He looked at the empty chair across the table and thought of his mother. She had died when he was a teenager, but she was the one who had taught him to love music. He wanted to picture her smile. He wanted to remember the way her eyes crinkled when she was proud of him. He closed his eyes to see her face. He saw her gray dress. He saw her hands holding a teacup. He saw her hair. But when he looked for her face, there was nothing. It was just a blur, a smudge, like someone had taken a wet cloth and wiped the paint off a canvas. Elias opened his eyes, his heart skipping a beat. "That's strange," he muttered. He closed his eyes again, concentrating hard. Mother, face, eyes, smile, nothing. A cold panic seized him. He stood up, knocking his chair over. He ran to a small wooden box under his bed where he kept an old photograph of her. He pulled it out, his hands shaking. He looked at the photo. It was faded, but the image was there. He could see her face in the paper. But when he looked away and tried to hold the image in his mind, it vanished instantly. The memory was gone. It had been erased. The merchant! Elias gasped. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He took her. He took the memory of her face. He felt sick. He felt a sudden urge to run back to the alley, to throw the violin at the merchant, to scream for his mother's face back. But then he looked at the table. The gold coins shone in the firelight. He looked at the golden violin, resting on the bed like a sleeping prince. He remembered the applause. He remembered the feeling of power in the square. The panic slowly turned into a cold, hard resolve. He took a deep breath. "It is just a face," he said to the empty room, his voice hollow. "I still know who she was. I have the money now. I have the future. It is a fair trade." He put the photograph away and picked up the violin. He chose the applause over the memory. But by the time the sun went down that night, nothing in his life would be the same. The silence inside his heart had begun to grow. Months turned into a year. The winter rain was replaced by spring flowers, and then by the heat of summer. But Elias did not notice the seasons changing. He was too busy being a star. His life had become a whirlwind of travel and applause. He no longer played on street corners. Now, he played in the greatest opera houses of the world, Paris, Vienna, London. He wore suits made of the finest silk. He traveled in private carriages with velvet seats. He ate at tables covered in white linen and silver. But the merchant's price was not a one-time payment. The golden violin was hungry. It demanded fuel for every masterpiece it created. At first, Elias tried to ignore the disappearances. It was easy to forget small things when the crowd was screaming his name. But soon, the holes in his mind became too big to hide. One evening in Rome, after a magnificent concert, a beautiful woman threw a red rose onto the stage. Elias picked it up. He remembered that he used to love the smell of roses. He brought the flower to his nose and inhaled deeply. Nothing. There was no scent. It was like smelling plastic. The memory of sweetness had vanished. A week later, he sat down to a feast of roast duck and wine. He took a bite, expecting the rich, savory flavor. But in his mouth, it tasted like dust. He drank the wine, but it tasted like water. He had lost the memory of taste. The losses continued, one by one, terrifyingly precise. He tried to remember the name of the first girl he had kissed. Gone. He tried to remember the feeling of grass under his bare feet. Gone. He tried to remember why he loved music in the first place. He knew he should love it, but he could not remember the feeling of joy. Elias became a ghost in a silk suit. On stage, he was a god of music. He moved his fingers, and the audience wept. They saw passion, fire, and soul. But inside, Elias felt absolutely nothing. He was hollow. He was a machine made of bone and skin, operating a wooden box. One night, he stood in front of a mirror in a dressing room in London. The lights around the mirror were bright and harsh. He looked at his own reflection. His face was pale, his eyes were empty. He looked like a stranger. "Who are you?" he whispered to glass. He waited for an answer, for a memory of his childhood self to surface. But the mirror only showed a tired, rich man with no past. He realized then that he was poor again. He had all the money in the world, but he had nothing that made life worth living. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making. "I have to stop," he said, gripping the edge of the table. "I cannot play anymore. If I play one more time, there will be nothing left of me." He decided to cancel the next concert. He decided to run away, to break the violin, to find the merchant and beg for his life back. He reached for his coat, but then a familiar, dry voice spoke in the shadows of the room. "Leaving so soon, Elias?" Elias froze. He did not need to turn around to know who it was. The merchant had come to collect the final payment. Elias spun around. The merchant was sitting in the velvet armchair in the corner of the dressing room. He looked exactly the same as the day they met. Immaculate black suit, pale skin, and that small, cold smile. "You look tired, Elias," the merchant said smoothly. "Success is heavy, isn't it?" "I want out," Elias said, his voice shaking. "I don't want this anymore. Take the violin back. I want my memories. I want to taste food. I want to remember my mother's face." The merchant chuckled. It was a sound like dry leaves crunched under a boot. "Refunds are not part of our agreement. Besides, tonight is the most important night of your life. The king is in the audience. The world is listening. You cannot stop now." Outside the door, the sound of the crowd was a deep roar like an ocean. They were chanting his name. "Elias, Elias." "The violin is hungry," the merchant whispered, standing up. "It needs a big payment for such a big night. It needs a final piece." Elias took a step back. "What piece? I have nothing left. You took my past. You took my feelings." "I want your name," the merchant said. He said it casually, as if asking for a glass of water. "After tonight, you will forget who you are completely. You will just be the musician, a vessel for the music. You will feel no pain, no loneliness, no regret. You will be empty, and you will be perfect." Elias felt a cold terror grip his heart. To lose his name? To forget that he was a human being? That was not fame. That was death. "No," Elias whispered. "Yes," the merchant hissed. His eyes flashed with sudden, dark anger. "Pick it up. The audience is waiting." Elias looked at the golden violin in the open case. It gleamed under the lights. It was the most beautiful thing in the world. It promised him glory. It promised him that tonight he would be a god. He looked at his own hands. They were trembling. If I play tonight, he thought, the music lives, but Elias dies. He slowly reached out and picked up the violin. The wood felt warm, almost like skin. He felt the vibration of the music waiting inside, eager to come out. The merchant smiled, satisfied. "Good boy. Now go and play." Elias lifted the violin to his chin. He raised a bow. He looked at the door leading to the stage. Then he looked at the merchant one last time. "You are right," Elias said softly. "The music is perfect." Then, with a scream of rage, Elias raised the violin high above his head. "No!" the merchant shrieked. Elias brought the golden instrument down with all his strength onto the marble corner of the dressing table. Crack! The sound was louder than a gunshot. The wood splintered. The golden varnish shattered. The string snapped with a terrible, high-pitched whine. Elias dropped the broken pieces to the floor. The golden light in the wood flickered once, and then went out. The violin was dead. Elias stood in the sudden silence, breathing hard. He was shaking, but for the first time in a year, he felt something real. He felt fear, and underneath the fear, he felt free. As the pieces of the golden violin hit the floor, the air in the room changed instantly. The heavy, magical pressure vanished. Elias looked up. The armchair in the corner was empty. The merchant was gone. There was no smoke, no explosion, no door slamming. He had simply disappeared. Like a shadow when a light is turned on, Elias stood alone in the silence. He looked at the broken wood at his feet. It looked like ordinary trash now. The magic was dead. Suddenly, Elias gasped. He grabbed his head with both hands. It started as a whisper in his mind, and then it became a flood. The smell of lavender, the taste of hot soup on a cold day, the sound of his own laughter, the feeling of grass between his toes. And then, the most important one, he saw it clearly. He saw gray hair, kind eyes, and a warm smile. "Mother," he sobbed. The image of her face was sharp and bright in his mind. It did not fade. He closed his eyes tight, tears streaming down his face, and held on to the memory. It was back. Everything was back. The pain, the joy, the boredom, the love. It all rushed into his empty heart, filling him up until he felt he might burst. Outside, the crowd began to shout. They were impatient. They wanted their music. Elias wiped his tears. He looked at his reflection in the mirror one last time. He saw a man who was ruined. He would never play in this concert hall again. He would be sued. He would be disgraced. He would be poor. He smiled. It was a real smile. He turned his back on the broken gold, opened the door, and walked out into the night. He left the silk suit, the money, and the fame behind him. 6 months later, on the corner of 4th Street in Maine, a young man stood in the drizzle. He wore a coat that was patched at the elbows. He held a cheap wooden violin that he had bought from a pawn shop. It was scratched and old. Elias lifted the bow. He began to play. The sound was not perfect. It was a little scratchy. It was not magical. It did not make the whole world stop. Most people walked past him, rushing to get out of rain. But the music was warm. It was human. It told a story of a man who had lost everything and found himself again. A little girl, holding her mother's hand, stopped. She listened for a moment, her eyes wide. She smiled at Elias. Elias winked at her and played a playful, happy note. He looked down at his violin case. There were only 2 copper coins inside. He was hungry. He was cold. But his head was full of memories, and his heart was full of peace. He was Elias. And that was enough. Let's look at Elias's story one more time, from the beginning to the end. Elias was a young, talented musician who lived in a rainy city. He played his violin on the street every day, but he was poor and lonely. He felt that the world did not see him. He wanted to be famous. He wanted everyone to listen to his music. One rainy night, he found a strange shop in a dark alley. Inside, he met a mysterious man called a merchant. The merchant showed Elias a beautiful golden violin. He told Elias that this violin would make him the greatest musician in the world. The price was not money. The price was his memories. Elias accepted the deal. He thought that losing a few memories was a small price to pay for his dream. Soon, Elias became incredibly famous. He traveled the world, earned gold coins, and played for kings. But with every concert, he lost something human. He forgot the taste of food. He forgot the smell of flowers. Worst of all, he forgot his mother's face. He became rich, but he felt empty inside. Finally, on the night of his biggest concert, the merchant came back. He told Elias that the final price was his name. If Elias played that night, he would forget who he was forever. Elias looked at the golden violin, and then he looked at his own trembling hands. He realized that being human was more important than being famous. He took the violin and smashed it against the table. The instrument broke, and the magic ended. The merchant disappeared. Instantly, all of Elias's memories returned. He remembered his mother, his past, and his feelings. He lost all his money and his fame, but he saved his soul. Now, he plays on the street again. He is poor, but he is happy because he knows exactly who he is. I want to tell you the truth about why I did it. I did not want the money. I did not really care about the silk suits or the expensive food. I just wanted you to look at me. I was so tired of being invisible. I walked through the city every day, and I felt like a ghost. I thought that if I could make you stop and listen, I would finally be real. When I met the merchant, I thought I was the smartest man in the world. I thought I was cheating him. I told myself, who cares about old memories? The past is dead. I want the future. I was wrong. I was so foolish. You don't know how terrifying it is to lose your mind, piece by piece. It wasn't painful like a cut or a burn. It was quiet. It was like water slipping through my fingers. One day, I reached for a memory of a summer day, and it was gone. The next day, I tried to remember the taste of an apple, and there was nothing. The worst moment, the moment that almost broke me, was when I tried to picture my mother. She was the person I loved most. But when I closed my eyes, I saw only white smoke. I knew I had a mother, but I could not feel her love anymore. I felt like a hollow shell. I realized then that a man without memories is not a man at all. Breaking that violin was the hardest thing I ever did. It felt like I was breaking my own arm. I knew I was destroying my career. I knew I was choosing poverty. But the moment the wood cracked, I could breathe again. The silence in my head was filled with noise, voices, songs, laughter, pain. It all came back. Now I stand in the rain again. My coat is thin. My shoes are wet. But I am not empty. I look at the gray sky, and I remember the blue sky of my childhood. I play my cheap violin, and I feel every note. I am poor, yes, but I am whole. And that is the end of the story of Elias and the golden violin. It is a quiet story, but it holds a heavy truth. In our own lives, we do not meet mysterious merchants in dark alleys. We do not trade memories for magic instruments. But we all face the same temptation that Elias faced. We live in a world that loves shortcuts. We often wish for things to be easy. We say, I wish I could speak English perfectly right now. Or, I wish I was rich without working. Or, I wish I could skip the hard days. We want the prize without the struggle. We want the golden violin. But Elias taught us that the struggle is actually the most important part. The long hours of practice, the mistakes, the cold nights, and the moments of doubt, these are the things that make us who we are. If you delete the struggle, you delete yourself. Imagine if you woke up tomorrow with perfect English, but you couldn't remember all the funny mistakes you made, or the teachers who helped you, or the songs you listened to. You would have the skill, but you would lose the story. So, the moral of our story is simple. Do not try to skip the journey. Your memories, even the sad ones, are the true gold. They are the only things that are truly yours. I hope this story helped you practice your English listening today. If you enjoyed this mystery and want to hear more stories like this, please press the like button. It helps other students find this channel. And if you haven't already, please subscribe so you don't miss our next story. I have a question for you to answer in the comments. I want to read your thoughts. What is one memory from your life that you would never trade away, no matter how much money someone offered you? Write your answer below. I would love to read about your precious memories. Thank you for listening. Sleep well, or have a wonderful day, and remember, you are writing your own story one day at a time.